All right, welcome to review video number 2. In this video, I want to talk about primary and secondary sources. So just as a reminder, let's look at our timeline. So when information is created, we have an event occurring. So this might be an actual historical event or research being done or published. So we have the original event, then we have the primary sources that are created. So this is going to be the initial contact with the information. Okay, so the original article where the information is presented, an interview, um, original reports, that sort of thing. Then we have the secondary sources, which are going to draw on those primary sources. So we're going to take those interviews and we're going to put them in a news article or a magazine. Now, news articles can, of course, be primary as well, depending on the situation, but secondary sources are going to refer to the primary sources. And then we have the tertiary sources. These are primarily going to be things like bibliographies, encyclopedias, atlases, things that combine a lot of secondary sources that combine general information from a variety of places, okay? So let's break this down a little bit. Primary sources, again, are the original records produced by the people who were there. So if it is an event, who was actually there, who originally created the data. If the original researchers creating original data, that's a primary source. The best sources for this are going to be created contemporaneously, so around the actual event. So if you're looking at something historical, this is going to be interviews with people who were there, videos of the actual event occurring, that sort of thing, which is separate from secondary sources, which may be created well after the fact, okay? So primary sources are contextual, so different things will be considered primary in different situations. The best example of this is if you're writing a paper about an author, for example. So books are generally considered to be secondary sources, but if you're writing about an author and you're using that information to psychoanalyze the author, then the books themselves may be considered your primary sources. Okay, so primary sources are contextual. Different things are considered primary in different circumstances. Okay. Secondary sources created after the fact will interpret, evaluate, discuss previous events. So the main thing here is this is an analysis of primary data. So if we're looking at, here's a bunch of interviews, if we're creating a news article that's looking back at things that happened 50 years ago. It's the 50th anniversary of this, that, or the other. That's going to be a secondary source, even though it's a news article, which is sometimes considered a primary source. Again, it's contextual. The main thing to remember is that secondary sources will generally refer to other sources. So it's going to refer to those primary sources. That's not to say that primary sources don't cite other things, but it does produce new information, okay? So it's creating new data, it's providing new information, whereas a secondary source is representing the information with new analysis, okay? And again, secondary sources are usually better if they're published more recently because it's analysis, so later works typically have more information to draw from. So this is opposite of the primary sources where the most contemporary to an event are going to be better. So that's one thing to think about, okay? Tertiary sources, you don't really need to know that much about other than that they exist. This is going to be things like bibliographies, encyclopedias, dictionaries, databases themselves, list of works. Your works cited is a tertiary source. So list of things, anything that refers to a lot of other things. The main thing to remember is that this is the third type and that it's going to be the least specific. Okay? So that concludes our brief review on primary, secondary, and tertiary sources.